Welcome to Philosophy with Tim Jacobs. Let's talk about Aristotle's Politics. Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BC. He wrote Nicomachean Ethics, which should be read before Politics because one completes the other. I also encourage you to watch my video on Plato's Republic, since Aristotle's political philosophy is a development of Plato's discussion of different forms of government. In order to understand how ethics and politics are related, it is helpful to see how Aristotle's works are conceptually related and ordered. This is not necessarily the chronological order in which he wrote them, but rather an order of causation and pedagogy. First, we must understand the basic division of the sciences. All inquiry may be known as science. A science is composed of starting principles, a subject, and demonstrated conclusions. The most foundational science is physics, the observation of visible and tangible things. Since it is the first science, its starting principles are things known to all people, or easily observable and deducible. As a science uses starting principles to form new conclusions, those conclusions can in turn become the starting principles of the next science. In this way, we can see a basic progression of sciences, and eventually a branching off of sciences into different sciences. Examples of starting principles may include the principles of identity, non-contradiction, or excluded middle. It will also include the principle of causality, sometimes known as the principle of sufficient reason, though it is important not to confuse Aristotle's version of the basic principle of causality with Leibniz's more specific version that includes predicate in notion, which I will not discuss now. The principle of causality can be split into 4 causes, which we'll talk about later. Physics is a speculative or theoretical science, which means the goal is simply to know truth. From it come mathematics and metaphysics, with increasing degrees of removal from tangible reality. Aristotle didn't call it metaphysics, he called it theology because it studies immaterial causes and unmoved movers. People quickly changed the name to metaphysics because it is to be studied after physics. The medieval Aristotelian Thomas Aquinas later split metaphysics and theology, saying that metaphysics is the highest philosophy we can learn on our own steam with natural reason and observation of reality. If the unmoved mover, or God, sends a special revelation, a letter, the Bible, to inform us of things we could not otherwise have known, then this would give us additional starting principles from which to deduce conclusions. This would then form a new science based on the Bible. That is theology. Remember that the sciences are cumulative, not separated. The modern desire to isolate and divide sciences so that they don't talk to each other is artificial and is a detriment to all of the sciences. Theology, then, should incorporate all the lessons learned from the other sciences. The progression of physics to mathematics to metaphysics to theology is within the theoretical sciences. The goal of each is to learn truth about reality. Truth is correspondence to reality. It is discovered, not created. It is not preference, but it is objective reality. The next group of sciences is the practical sciences. These depend on the theoretical sciences because you must know the truth in order to apply it. Practical sciences have the goal to know truth for the sake of applying truth to action. Here we start with ethics, as we talk about an individual person's actions and character. But this finds its culmination and completion in politics because the common good is the ultimate fulfillment of the inclinations we find in human nature. In other words, the fulfillment of what we're made for is not found in what individuals may possess by themselves alone and separate from others. Rather, the fulfillment of the individual is found when they are a member of a whole, a body that is bigger than themselves, that in turn possesses something great that cannot be possessed by individuals alone. This is the common good. Before we continue on about the common good, our last group of sciences is the productive sciences, whose goal is to produce something. Rhetoric produces speeches for the purpose of persuasion. Techne, also known as art or technology, produces things. This includes the fine arts, drama, music, technology, or any craft whatsoever. Now let's turn more specifically to the relationship between Aristotle's ethics and his politics, a relationship that is only understood if you have a proper understanding of the classical shared common good, not the modernist social contract common good. At the end of Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle says that since virtue fulfills a person's flourishing and happiness, that which fulfills many people should be discussed next. Before we go into Aristotle's politics itself, it is essential to have a proper understanding of the concept known as the common good. This concept was distorted in the Enlightenment, and many modern philosophers still look at Aristotle through this distorted lens. The shared common good is not like post-Enlightenment discussions of the common good. Starting in the 1600s and 1700s, the common good was thought of as a collection of individual goods. This means that if one person possesses the good of a flourishing life, then another, and so on, the more the merrier. The aggregate collection of the most number of people is the common good. This common good is not a good that is possessed by any one person. The only goods that individuals possess are individual goods, not collective goods. The common good is just the collection of all of them together. Oftentimes, this is what is meant by the greater good, which refers only to a greater number of smaller goods. What is common by predication. That means different people separately possess something that resembles what other people have. Two people might be healthy or strong, but they do not possess each other's health or strength. The common good in this view can vary in size. The more people who have flourishing, the larger the common good. No matter how small or large the common good, an individual always possesses the same amount of good. They only possess their own individual good. This is kind of like popcorn. The greater good is just adding up the small goods. This is the foundation of the social contract theory, of the role of society and government. Enlightenment thinkers said that life without society sees a supposed state of nature, where a person is free and has natural rights. However, this freedom is limited by other people's natural rights. Therefore, in order for us to get along, we create a social contract, a ceasefire agreement. In doing so, we create a government and give up some of our rights to it so that it can keep the peace. This is why Thomas Hobbes called it the Leviathan. It's bigger than us and, in some sense, consumes us. In this view, government is a kind of necessary evil. In other words, the goal of government in the social contract theory is to ensure personal freedoms so individuals can pursue individualistic and self-centered goals. This is often called classical liberalism, although the word classical only refers to Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and the like. Debates between Republicans and Democrats in the United States are often only about the best way to ensure that we are free to pursue individualistic goals. Indeed, our Constitution codifies this individualism, as it is based on the Enlightenment concepts of the social contract theory and civil rights. The language of the Constitution focuses on an individual's freedoms and rights. Again, in this view, the greater good is like popcorn, the sum total of small individualistic goods. Acting for the greater good means doing something that increases what John Stuart Mill called the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Problems with the social contract theory can start to appear as we see that the popcorn in your bowl is not the same as the popcorn in my bowl. In other words, the goods that you possess are not the goods that I possess. But if you collect all of the goods that you and I possess together, yes, we have more popcorn, but none of us possesses the whole amount of the popcorn. And so I do not possess the common good, and you do not possess the common good, and together we do not possess the common good. But the common good is just the sum total of the popcorn I have and the popcorn you have, even though they are still possessed separately. The result is that if I choose to do a good action, am I going to serve you or am I going to serve me? Am I going to give you the popcorn or am I going to get the popcorn? We cannot both eat the same popcorn kernels. This reduces ethics to altruism and egoism. I am always either only serving someone else or serving myself. But why should I be moral? Why should I care about you? Why should one person care about another. What does it get me? The social contract theory does not sufficiently answer the most basic question in ethics. If I do not possess the greater good after serving the greater good, then it cannot fulfill a need that I have and a desire that I have. Therefore, I cannot have my desire for the common good fulfilled. I cannot seek the common good and have that seeking be satisfied because I never possess this collective good. Acting for the greater good is meant to fulfill the needs that other people have. And the more people that have their needs fulfilled, the better things are, the better the state of affairs. But nobody possesses the global state of affairs. I may still be left with none of my needs fulfilled. This isn't just a problem of motivation and mustering up enough love to serve others more than myself. It is an epistemological and metaphysical problem of reasons and causes. I literally have no reason to help someone else. If I do, then what I do to serve someone else fulfills something in me. If I have a motive to serve someone else, then when I serve someone else, it fulfills something in me. That means I'm only using them as a tool to fulfill my egoistic ends under this version of the common good. Ethics then breaks down because this means that our ethical system is one of selfishness, of egoism. Indeed, the classical liberal Ayn Rand said selfishness is a virtue. This no longer sounds like ethics. There is, however, another way to view the goal of humanity, the common good, and the role of society. A more classical view that goes back at least as far as Plato and persisted through the medieval period. In this view, as Aristotle explains it, a person by themselves can possess some goods by himself or herself, like health or some virtue, but an individual cannot have love or reproduction or many other goods. So when individuals come together to form a family, they can accomplish more together. They now possess things they couldn't have as individuals. An individual cannot possess healthy family as an individual. The subject and the object that is possessed are both singular. An individual can only possess the object if it is a member of a whole unit that is bigger than the individual. Think of it this way. When a team possesses a victory, it is not, properly speaking, the individuals who possess it. It is the team that possesses it. It is a team win. The team is the one who wins. There is one object, the victory, and one subject, the team. Now the individuals possess it insofar as they are members of the team, but any onlookers who are not part of the team do not possess the victory. They may, however, be happy for the team and benefit from the team, from their victory, but they themselves do not possess the victory. Such is a picture of the common good. With a family, the members of the family are the ones who possess the family. Now, neighbors, gardeners, friends, visitors, they all benefit from the family, but they don't possess the family because they're not members of the family. So when you have something like healthy family or good family, that is a good that is possessed by the family and by the individuals only insofar as they're part of the family. Good family or healthy family is not just the sum total collection of individual goods, but rather it's a new thing. It's more than just the sum of its parts. Just like a team is not just the sum total of a bunch of individuals, but rather it's a new thing, a new unit with different parts, different roles, different players doing different positions, all together as one body, like a hand, a foot, an eye, a head. All these different parts together form a new thing, the body, the family, the team, this new common good. This new body can possess a new object, namely the common good. Now, a family is still limited and cannot fulfill all the inclinations we find in human nature. We desire justice, education, particularly in philosophy, and so much more. Focusing on justice, an individual and a family cannot have impartiality, so they can at best have individual and family feuds. There must be an impartial entity that stands outside of families to arbitrate justice and ensure peace. There is no room for vigilante justice, which has no accountability and reduces to vengeance. There is a similarity here with the social contract theory, since both think that it is the government's job to keep justice and peace. The difference, however, is that the social contract theory sees the government as a necessary evil and limitation on an individual's individualistic goals. The tool of that social contract theory, the goal of that social contract theory is just that individuals will possess individual goods. The shared common good, however, sees society more like a family. While the healthy nuclear family is the simplest building block of a healthy society, society itself is seen as the fulfillment of human nature, a sort of bigger family. We are by nature social, and we can accomplish more together than individualistically. Our team victories are things we could not accomplish together, whereas the social contract theory says that society is just a means or tool to individualistic goals. The shared common good sees society as the fulfillment of our natural inclination for impartial justice and complete flourishing. The shared common good, then, is the purpose of a healthy government or regime. You might call this the final cause or purpose of a healthy nation. As stated earlier, the principle of causality can be split into the four causes, which may be easily understood in reference to a simple object, like a bronze statue. The formal cause asks, "What is it?" and answers, "A statue of a man, or a woman, or a person, whatever." The material cause asks, "What is it composed of?" and answers, "Bronze, or marble, or whatever." The efficient cause asks, "What is the principle of its origin, change, or continued stability?" and answers, "The sculptor, the artist, whoever." The final cause asks, "What's its purpose?" or simply, "Why?" and answers, "To remember a hero." Of these, the most important is the final cause, for the purpose of a thing determines what it is, and consequently what it should be composed of and how it should be made. Let's see how these come into play in political philosophy and the formation of a city. So getting back to the city, the final cause or purpose of a city is the common good. It is not just a social contract that is useful for individuals acting individualistically. It is a greater good that cannot be possessed by individuals who are separate from the team, family, or united body of people. Note, nations at the time in Greece were city-states, or a polis, from which we get the word politics, politician, and so on. The material cause of a nation or of a polis, which asks, what is it made of, is the citizens. In other words, a family is made of family members. While other people may benefit from the family or from the nation, like visitors or immigrants or people who are not yet citizens, not yet members, only those who are members of it possess the nation. In other words, it is the members who possess and are fulfilled by this common good. But non-members are maybe benefited externally, but they don't possess the, for example, team victory. They can use the family or nation for their own personal gain, but they are not part of the flourishing group. The formal cause, or shape, definition, and qualities of the nation is its organizational structure. This includes customs and traditions, shared values, government. All of this is understood to be contained in the term regime. The efficient cause, or origin of a polis, is its founder or founders, and the efficient cause of its continued stability is the continuing operation of a healthy government and virtuous culture. I know it's taken a while to establish our foundation, but armed with an understanding of the shared common good and how the four causes relate to political philosophy, we can move to the next step. As I already mentioned, Aristotle says that an individual person is, by nature, fulfilled in the common good, not in individualistic goods. To fully understand this, we need to understand human nature. You can look at other videos of mine, such as Aristotle's Categories, Psychology, or Virtues, to understand. You can look at other videos of mine, such as Aristotle's Categories, Aristotle's Psychology, or Aristotle on Virtue, to understand the basics behind why humans are called rational animals. In short, our most distinctive power, our most distinctive trait is the power of reason. In Politics, Book 1, Aristotle gives three basic arguments for why humans are by nature political. It is important to think of political as more akin to social, where social is not merely friendly or in a relationship in a family group, but an ordered, structured society. The three arguments, or perhaps three aspects or steps in one argument, are these. First, The polis fulfills natural associations. We'll look at this closer in a sec. Second, humans have speech and are thus ordered by nature to be social. The difference between animal signals and human speech is that human speech is ordered by reason to form discourse, the purpose of which is to communicate about how best to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. Since humans use reason to discuss how to fulfill pleasures, their highest delight is in contemplation and understanding and the cultivation of virtue. So they discuss how to cultivate virtue as a community. Third, the ultimate end of humanity is virtue, found in the common good, not merely isolated individual virtue. In terms of efficient causation, the individual is prior to the community, but in terms of final causation, the ultimate goal determines all lower goals and is thus prior. Like we said before, how the final cause is the first and most important and determines the nature of all of the rest of the causes, the form, the efficient, and the material cause. In this way, the polis, which serves the common good, is prior and more ultimate than the individual. This is another way of saying that the natural inclinations built into human nature are fulfilled in the common good, found only in community, not in isolated individuals. So, being political is a property of human nature, a property of being rational. My video on Aristotle's categories includes instruction on how to define an essence with the 5 predicables that are discussed in Aristotle's Topics and Porphyry's Isagoge, or introduction to his categories. In short, a proper definition, a perfect definition of an essence, such as human nature, will point to the most distinctive, essential quality of a substance. For humans, that is reason. So the most proper definition is that humans are rational animals. An essence causes properties to manifest. Although properties are not the essence of a thing, they are always present as an effect of the essence. This can form a set of secondary definitions. In this way, we may say that humans are linguistic animals, risible animals, which means able to understand humor, or political animals. We are not merely social, for it is easy to think of a school of fish or a flock of birds, but we use reason to order ourselves into structured communities. The argument that a polis fulfills the individual merits closer inspection. If we view society as a social contract, as did Hobbes, Locke, or other modernist thinkers, then the origins of society look like this. In a state of nature, we are free. Anarchy is the utopia of freedom, but not all is well in this Garden of Eden. One person's individual freedoms and so-called rights butt up against another person's free pursuits. War ensues as we fight for whatever we want to do as individuals, but war is a greater limit on freedom. We form a ceasefire pact and give up some of our rights to laws that limit our freedom. To ensure these laws are kept, we give these rights specifically to a government. So the goal of government is to ensure individualistic freedoms, but its tool for doing so is to limit freedom. This inherent contradiction gives rise to disputes, power struggles, and disagreements over how best to ensure that people can keep being individualistic. The goal is not the common good, but individualism. By contrast, Aristotle says that the pre-political state begins with individuals pairing up into marriages for the sake of reproduction. As a result, households form. A household is not just a collection of individuals, rather an individual by themselves certainly can survive with basic food and shelter, but that's kind of an animal existence. A uniquely human existence needs more. Human flourishing needs households, not just for continuation of the species, but because human flourishing needs households for adequate propagation of the species and sustenance and basic necessities of life, a full and active family life. We can accomplish more together than separate, more as a family than as isolated individuals. An individual cannot possess a family, as I said before, so family and further extended family is a good, a new common good that cannot be possessed by individuals alone, but only individuals that are members of this whole group, members of the family that is bigger than they are. 2 people do not possess 2 marriages, but together possess 1. 5, 10, 20, 40 possess not 40 families, but 1. At some point, a collection of families forms a village, which grow out of a natural impulse to congregate, and they can accomplish more than a single family by itself. Specialized craftsmen focus on various trades and the beginnings of society form. Again, we can accomplish more together than apart. For those of you who have read Plato's Republic, you can see Socrates' so-called city of pigs influence Aristotle here. With villages, we may have more than with just families, but when disputes arise, we can only have family feuds. What's needed for true justice is an impartial polis. The goal of the regime of the polis is the common good of all. At this point, a social contract theorist may say that this doesn't look that different from their view, but Aristotle says in Book 3, Chapter 10 of the Politics that the goal of the polis is virtue, not freedom. He says, whence it may be further inferred that virtue must be the care of a state, which is truly so called, and not merely enjoys the name. For without this end, the community becomes a mere alliance, like a social contract, which differs only in place from alliances of which the members live far away. And the law is only a convention, a surety to one another of justice, as the sophist Lycophron says, and has no real power to make citizens good and just. You can see here that Aristotle was aware of what would become the social contract theory. Social contract theory is really just a ceasefire agreement between us and our neighbors. And there's no difference between that and an alliance with a faraway country. The only difference is distance. At the end, we're mostly interested in our own individual good and using this relationship to serve our own private interests. The goal of laws in this social contract theory is a mere alliance, a social convention, an instrument. By contrast, the shared common good sees the purpose of law is to make men good. The purpose of the law is to make men good. Again, we can accomplish more together than apart. This applies to accomplishing more virtue, not just using society as a tool for our own self-interest. I've talked at length about the classical understanding of the shared common good against the modernist social contract theory's version of the common good for two reasons. First, it is the ultimate goal of human life. The goal is not individual flourishing but group flourishing. Said another way, the ultimate good is not individualistic goods but the common good. As Thomas Aquinas points out, though, there is not only the natural common good found in the polis, which is the earthly manifestation of the common good, but also a further supernatural common good found in God. We are moderately fulfilled in earthly common good, but only fully fulfilled in union with God, or the beatific vision. Since common goods are enjoyed more the more they are shared, we have a natural impulse to share our joys with others. This is why we can't help but share our photos with family and friends. What's a vacation without loved ones along? We are naturally drawn to share our joys because we are designed in such a way that our natures are fulfilled not in individualism, but in the shared common good. Since we are partially fulfilled in the common good found in the polis, we are naturally inclined to help our fellow man and flourish together. But since our ultimate fulfillment is found in union with God, we also have a natural impulse to share Him with others. Thus, while the purpose of life is to find union with God, an important tool for spreading this joy as a common good is evangelism. But let's go back to Aristotle's Politics. With an understanding of the final cause of the polis as the common good, we can start to look at the formal cause, the regime, the shape or order of a community. This will in turn determine its material cause, who its citizens are. Citizens are those individuals who are truly members of the society and possess the common good. They are members of the team. As such, they are those who act in ruling and ordering society. They take an active role in steering society where it goes, and in creating this order and sustaining this order. They participate. A polis, or a nation that has a ruler of one, will truly be a nation that only has one citizen. A nation ruled by many will have many citizens. The number of those in authority is the second way to determine different categories of regimes, with the first being whether or not the regime aims at the common good or individual goods. But let's start with understanding more clearly what politics is. Politics relates to the basic order of society. A country's politics or regime is more than just its government. It also includes its shared values, customs, shared stories, language, and yes, government. The order of a society may come more from custom than explicit laws. Oftentimes in the past, there was not the ability to write down all of the laws, and there's a lot more self-government and custom involved. Certainly until the United States, we did not have a single unified constitutional written document. And so it's important to think of regime as all of the customs and order and habits of society, how they organize themselves through their culture and through their laws. The form of society is called regime. We may also use the term form of government or constitution, so long as we understand this to mean more than just the laws. In Aristotle's words, a regime is an organization of offices in a city by which their method of distribution is fixed, the sovereign authority determined, and the nature of the end to be pursued by the association or community, and all its members is prescribed. In Aristotle's words, a regime is an organization of offices in a city by which their method of distribution is fixed, the sovereign authority determined, and the nature of the end to be pursued by the association or community and its members is prescribed. Russell Hittinger explains, a regime is the form or scheme which organizes political society with respect to its offices, especially the sovereign. In other words, it is about who deliberates and judges in light of what purpose. Purposes include the idea of the good life, which is the common good, ethics, the individual good, also an idea of justice, the political good determining who should rule. There are various claims to rule, and for the end of political society, the three basic claims are virtue, wealth, and numbers. Each claim gives rise to different regimes. Aristocracy, which is rule of the few best, democracy, which is the rule of many who are frequently poor, oligarchy, which is the rule of the few wealthy, or the rule of the best and most powerful man, kingship or tyranny. Each claim has some truth to it, but remains partial. Hence, it must be checked and balanced by others. Each claim has its basis in the contribution of the whole. None can be absolutized, or else kingship can be invoked, if not tyranny. But the best regime for the most is the mixed regime, or polity, which is a prudential mix of all of the claims. That will make more sense as we detail the different types of regimes. We can divide the regimes according to two principles: the number of rulers and their stated claim to authority, and whether they serve the common good or individual goods. First, the rule of one is a monarchy, and ideally a single person's claim to rule is being the most virtuous person. You can see here the influence of Plato's philosopher kings on Aristotle. If the single ruler does indeed serve the common good with the goal of leading all people in virtue, then we have a kingship. If instead the monarch's goal is to treat everyone as slaves and to be their master, then the monarch is a tyrant, serving only his own individual goals. Second, a society largely functions by having a stable economy. So the rule of the few may either claim authority by being a few plurality of virtuous people who serve the common good, in which case we have a virtuous aristocracy, or the few may rule because of wealth, in which case we have an oligarchy. And of course, an aristocracy can also have the claim of wealth as well, but wealth for the sake of the common good, not individualistic greed. While you can see Aristotle's categorizing regimes under roughly the same categories as Plato's Republic, Aristotle is more apt to say that there are multiple forms of good government, and their decay is not necessarily linear from one regime to another, but simply from serving the common good to serving individual self-interest. Third, a regime ruled by many has its claim of authority in being more representative of the interests of all. The more people who participate in ruling as citizens, the more the rulers will have a clearer picture of the needs of the masses. The claim here is that numbers serve the common good best. Now, if the mass of individuals are serving only their own private interests, as we see under social contract theory, then we have democracy. And you can see Aristotle taking a clue from Plato, having democracy be one of the worst forms of government. Democracy is the rule of the many for individual gain. Any discussion of the common good here is distorted and is only a euphemism for collection of individualistic goods. It is here that we find Ayn Rand praising selfishness as a virtue. Our modern society is aimed at this and built on this. Disagreements between Democrats and Republicans are not primarily disagreements about the goal of individualism expressed through entitlement and individualistic rights, but rather debates about how best to accomplish our own selfishness. By contrast, the rule of many for the classical understanding of the common good is polity. The Greek word here is the same as the generic word for regime or constitution, but it doubles as a specific regime. The polity, or Aristotle's mixed regime, is his favorite form of government, and it is meant to take the best from each claim to authority. It claims virtue because the best possible common good comes when the most number of people are together flourishing in virtue. It claims the best of aristocracy because it is the rule of virtue, and also best embodies representation of the whole community in matters of economy. And of course, it is the rule of the many instead of the rule of the few. Let's focus in on contrasting the worst form of government, or tyranny, with the best form of government, polity. In Aristotle's view, the claim of a virtuous king, the sort of philosopher king, may be the best possible form of government in theory because the claim of virtue is the most important. Realistically, we can expect an individual person to be more virtuous than a group of people, whereas a group of people will not only pool its virtues, but also pool its vices and its wickedness. We can imagine selecting the most virtuous person to rule as an individual. Another benefit of monarchy is that there is political unity. Rule will not be slowed down by wasting time arguing and figuring out solutions. The more people who rule, the more time is wasted talking about change rather than making change. In fact, if too many people rule, government could stalemate and grind to a halt. With a monarchy, there is no red tape. Bureaucracy doesn't get in the way, and change can happen quickly. The problem is that even Aristotle knew that absolute power corrupts absolutely. In other words, although monarchy has the potential to be the greatest, it also has the potential to be the worst as well. For when a kingship corrupts, it becomes a tyranny, the worst form of government. Another way to say it is that the kingship's claim to authority by virtue has these pros. This also applies, perhaps, to aristocracy. First, the polis will clearly aim at the good life of virtue in the common good, not merely continued existence and health. As we've said, the potential for one person to be virtuous is greater than for many to be virtuous. Second, it will withhold lawmaking responsibilities and voting from evil people, the vicious, the insane, criminals, and certainly children, which we do to some extent in the United States. But it would more clearly say that wicked people could not have a hand in ruling. Third, also, the few virtuous people are more apt to prefer the common interest over private interest, while masses of people are more likely to be self-interested. Again, when you imagine this few or one virtuous person ruling, you cannot imagine our current circumstance, because our current circumstance looks nothing like this in the United States. Think about the most virtuous person that you know, or group of people that you know. What if they were ruling? Or what if our rulers had that much virtue? Something along those lines. But the cons of monarchy or aristocracy are these. First, the rule of a single person or a few essentially makes the polis a citizenship of one, or only a few. This means that fewer people are truly participating in possessing the common good. The people who are ruled are not truly members of the polis, but are benefactors of it. They're external. They are like the neighbors or the gardeners or the people who are cheering on the sidelines for the team. They benefit from the victory, but they don't possess it themselves. In this way, you may see a monarchy as something outside of a true polis. Second, power breeds arrogance, and absolute power has a greater risk of corruption, as I already mentioned. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Third, virtue may be found in numbers as well. While the potential is great for there to be a single person of outstanding virtue, when a group of virtuous people truly work together, they can help each other be more virtuous than they would be isolated or separate on their own. Alternatively, a polity, while not having as high of a potential for virtue, also corrupts more slowly. A crowd of virtuous people accomplishes good things slower than a virtuous individual king, but a vicious mob also accomplishes harm slower than a single tyrant. In other words, realistically, a polity is the best safeguard against corruption. And you can see here that Aristotle is a little bit more realistic than Plato, understanding the human condition a little bit more. The pros of a polity are these. First, the many are less apt to show great wickedness and vice. They are more likely to be self-regulating, or at least for the wickedness to have less power as the power is dispersed among so many people. Second, the many can combine their strengths and virtue to accomplish more together than a single ruler or only a few rulers. The potential is great if considered cumulative. Third, a polity enjoys the rule of the people by the people. This self-rule must be earned through the cultivation of virtue, not granted as a natural birthright. Otherwise, corruption will grow and gradually decay the polity into a democracy. This points to our cons. First, the rule of many can devolve into mob rule. If interest in the common good gives way to interest in private goods, the rule of the many overtakes minorities. Majority rules and becomes a form of tyranny, and oppression can grow. Second, mob passion has great inertia. It is harder to stop a mob than a single person. A mob is also less rational. Third, realistically, we cannot expect extraordinary virtue from the masses. History has shown that most people are not virtuous. There are more ways to err than to stay on the straight and narrow good path. In the end, Aristotle prefers polity over kingship or aristocracy because it seems to be the most realistic and has the most safeguard against corruption. In this way, he differs from Plato. While he agrees with Plato that something like a philosopher king would potentially be the best, this idealism just isn't realistic. In particular, while Plato saw the individual as a microcosm of the polis, or the polis as the individual writ large, Aristotle saw them as more distinct. Plato saw a correspondence between a three-part soul and a three-part society. Aristotle does not consider the soul tripartite, and he draws a bigger distinction between the individual and the polis by saying that the polis is aimed at the common good and is the ultimate fulfillment of individuals, while individuals alone only possess private goods. As a result, Plato's Republic really only sees the philosopher kings as completely virtuous. Aristotle sees everyone as completely virtuous in this polity, at least that's the goal, so long as society is doing its job of pursuing the common good through the cultivation of virtue. Said another way, the philosopher king is the only one who is capable of ruling because he is the only one who is fully virtuous. The other categories of people or classes do not have full virtue, if you go back and read Plato's Republic. But in Aristotle, classes are not related to amount of virtue or kind of virtue. Classes are only related to amount of money. And so the ability to rule does not have to do with your class or with how much money you have, but whether or not you are virtuous. Ultimately, Plato and Aristotle have a similar view of the common good, and both agree that the individual is fulfilled in the virtuous polis. Honestly, interpreters are not even sure if Plato was actually proposing a real government, or only an ideal one to strive towards, or maybe just mechanism for explaining justice in the individual soul. I think he was proposing a political philosophy that we should try to follow. But in any case, time and time again, Aristotle brings a dose of realism about the human condition to Plato. They are not to be seen as enemies, for Aristotle is mostly Plato with development and corrections. By contrast to modernism and postmodernism, Plato and Aristotle stand as friends with common enemies. So what does Aristotle's polity look like? Aristotle imagined a government divided into three branches, and these three branches roughly resemble what we have in the United States. Remember, however, that while in some respects the United States resembles Aristotle's polity by being a representative rule of the many with a three-branch division of powers, it also represents Aristotle's democracy, which is a corrupted mob rule whose goal is individualistic self-interest instead of virtue as a shared common good. Our talk of freedom today is freedom to do what we want, not freedom from debased passions cultivated by a lifetime of practicing and growing virtue. There's two different versions of freedom here. Our talk of freedom today in the social contract theory is a hedonistic freedom, freedom to do what we want. But in the classical understanding of freedom, it's freedom from our debased passions. It is our own chaotic emotions and desires that limit us, that hold us back, that cause us to do evil. And through the cultivation of virtue, we earn freedom from our own passions by practicing the virtues and growing virtue through a lifetime of cultivation. Freedom, then, is a goal, not a birthright. Aristotle saw the need for three basic elements of a constitution: a deliberative body, an officiating body, and a judicial body. These roughly correspond to the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch, known in the United States as Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court. A closer look at Aristotle's deliberative and official branches show that their responsibilities do not exactly line up with the United States, but this need not concern us too deeply. The deliberative element has authority in matters of war and making alliances, which our Congress has. The official element appoints ministers and civil servants. In the United States, this could either be representatives in Congress or the president appointing cabinet members, judges, ambassadors, and so on. But these also need to be approved by Congress. Aristotle's judicial element parallels our court system, and particularly the Supreme Court. The successful operation of a polity will depend on continued moral education. Since the purpose of law is to make men good, moral education is essential. Aristotle says repeatedly that nothing beats a good upbringing. Indeed, while laws may encourage the formation of virtuous habits through rewards and punishments, it can hardly hope to fix the criminally minded who did not have a virtuous upbringing. Regardless, upbringing is not an excuse, but it can be a great asset to the cultivation of virtue. Economically, the polity will be mostly sustained by a healthy middle class. The upper class, Aristotle says, consists in those who are extremely prosperous. They may be a great asset to society, but they are also likely to be primarily focused on individual gain. The lower class consists of those who are extremely disadvantaged. The poor will likely also be consumed with providing for their basic needs and hardly have time or energy to focus on the common good. The middle class consists of those who are at neither extreme. They may be less distracted by excessive wealth and therefore not prone to as much greed, but they are also financially stable and contribute to society rather than drain society. Therefore, they are in a position to have the most healthy interest in the common good. It is important to note that Aristotle is not saying that any of these classes is inherently good or evil. Rather, the circumstance of the middle class is a circumstance most conducive to serving the common good, as it is a combination of stability and resistance to greed. Of course, anyone can have the vice of greed or various virtues. The point here is only to say that in general terms, when people have the common good in mind, the middle class is the most equipped to serve the stability of the polis. In order to equip people to guard against tyranny, Aristotle provides some extra detail on this most vicious of regimes. In particular, Aristotle outlines several tactics of tyrants that they use to propagate their tyranny. As with so many other areas of Aristotle's politics, readers of Plato's Republic can see Plato's significant influence on Aristotle. The tactics of the tyrant are these. First, a tyrant breeds mutual distrust among the people. He divides and conquers, destroying friendships and preventing free associations of people. He aims to isolate people from each other, keeping them as strangers and ultimately pit them against each other as enemies. A house divided against itself cannot stand. So, dividing the populace is the best way to ensure they do not rise up and revolt. Second, a tyrant makes people incapable of action by reducing their strength and efficacy. The tyrant does this by keeping them ignorant, and even ignorant of their own ignorance. No one is more pliable than an ignorant person who thinks they have knowledge. Ignorance may be propagated by outright lies or propaganda. How do you see people becoming more ignorant in the United States? The education system is in decline. News media is becoming less trustworthy, and the populace is finding it more and more difficult to figure out who to trust. The tyrant also prevents their action by keeping them passive. Do you see people in America being kept passive by cheap appeasements, inability of action, and empty promises? Lastly, the tyrant prevents their action by depriving them of means. A person without weapons cannot declare war. Associations without resources or property cannot claim independence. They cannot be self-sufficient. Remove the resources of people through hyper-limiting laws, taxation, or other methods, and people will be handcuffed. How is our self-sufficient middle class in America doing? It is shrinking quickly. The poor are distracted by just surviving, and the tyrant cements their dependence on him by giving them free stuff instead of encouraging them to support themselves. Third, tyrants break the spirit of the populace through fear. The tyrant will use threats, punishments, violence, and other direct or indirect oppressive techniques to make people petrified with fear. What can one man do against such large forces of evil? Let me ask you, if you are an American, do you feel like you have the power to effect big change in our country? Fear spreads through humiliation as well. Tyrants defame, humiliate, and slander groups and individuals. Maybe this is happening today through cancel culture, identity politics, and the general spirit of the times where politics is given to insults and calling people names instead of rational discourse. In the United States, this also looks like censorship in the name of tolerance. More and more people are afraid to speak because freedom of speech is giving way to fear that one will be fired, canceled, or otherwise humiliated. The last way the tyrant breaks the spirits of the populace is through creating dependence. As mentioned before, we are seeing this in America. More and more people are becoming dependent on government aid. A tyrant wants to control his people, so he makes sure they cannot survive on their own. Laws, regulations, and the general system created by tyrants are aimed at keeping power centralized and taking self-sufficiency and power away from masses. Remember, a tyrant is not the rule of many, so it is inherently opposed to government by the people, for the people. It serves self-interest and not the common good. In the end, while tyranny is often seen in the rule of one person like a monarch, Aristotle clearly leaves room for tyranny by many people. In the United States, we started with a constitution based on the social contract theory and with the goal of individualistic pursuit of happiness, instead of the shared common good constituted in a shared morality of virtue. The Bill of Rights, for example, propagates the Enlightenment fiction of natural rights and civil rights. The result is an attitude of entitlement. The world owes me something. Freedom is freedom to do whatever I want. Freedom is an entitlement, something I am given by birth. Instead of emphasizing responsibilities, we emphasize rights, what everyone owes me instead of what I should do for everyone else. An older view of freedom was that we are seeking freedom from our debased passions, which is the source of our own evil, our chaotic emotions, and following not wisdom but foolishness. While individualism seeks freedom to follow any desire, the classical common good seeks freedom from chaotic and disordered desires. This freedom is constituted in the life of virtue attained through reason and wisdom leading emotion instead of the other way around, where the mind follows the heart. Virtue comes through hard work of practicing wise actions, not following my heart and whatever I desire. The United States does not have as its goal the shared common good and the flourishing life of virtue. By Aristotle's account, it is a debased democracy. My aim in this last comment is not to say that the United States is the enemy. Rather, it is still our family. There is reason for a classical nationalism. Aristotle depicts the nation as ultimately an extension of the family. When my family has problems, I don't run away, I stay and help heal. It is still my family. No matter how good and bad it is, I am proud that it is my family and I love my family. So the solution right now is not revolution, but reformation. Instead of blame shifting, let's get to work. Instead of rejecting our country, love aims to fix it. Instead of focusing on rights, we should focus on responsibilities. In particular, the responsibility to cultivate virtue and to help others cultivate virtue by making sure that is the goal of our education system, our parenting of morals, as well as the goal of our laws. The purpose of the law is to make men good. And in parenting, we need to focus on parenting virtues into our children. Certainly in the education system, we need to focus on rationality and wisdom more than a certain political agenda. In the United States right now, the goal of laws is to ensure individualistic hedonism, and the goal of education is to be the tool of censorship and propaganda. Instead, Aristotle said that the two essential tools of a polis, education and laws, should be aimed at cultivating virtue. The purpose of the law is to make men good. I cannot say that enough. The purpose of the law is to make men good, not to give them the freedom to do whatever they want. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go back and watch my other videos on Aristotle as well as Plato. Everything they say is related and interconnected. A full understanding needs familiarity with each and every aspect of their philosophies.